80% of the world's diamonds pass through the hands of fewer than 500 families. Not De Beers, not African mines, not Russian oligarchs. 500 Jewish families, mostly Israeli, control a $300 billion industry from a single square mile in Tel Aviv called Ramat Gan. They cut, polish, trade and price nearly every diamond that ends up on engagement rings from New York to Tokyo. The global diamond trade, older than most nations, more secretive than Swiss banking, bends to their will. But what nobody knows is how they did it. How merchants who arrived in Israel with nothing in 1948 dismantled a century-old South African monopoly. How they turned Judaism's tight-knit community networks into an unbreakable business advantage. How they navigated blood diamonds, international sanctions, money laundering accusations, and technological disruption while maintaining absolute control. The methods they used were brilliant, ruthless, and operate in shadows to this day. While tech billionaires flash their wealth and oil tycoons dominate headlines, Israel's diamond families have built something more valuable: invisibility with absolute power. Their names don't appear on Forbes lists. Their deals happen in private offices where handshakes move millions. Their influence shapes conflicts in Africa, politics in Israel, and luxury markets worldwide. This is the story of how Israel's diamond tycoons built a global empire and why nobody outside the industry knows their names. Walk into the Israel Diamond Exchange in Ramat Gan today, and you'll enter the world's largest diamond trading floor. 4 interconnected towers, 2,500 traders, 3,000 daily transactions worth over $400 million. Every major diamond that moves from mine to market passes through these buildings. The security rivals military installations. The wealth concentrated in briefcases and vault boxes exceeds the GDP of small nations. This is the beating heart of the global diamond trade, and it belongs entirely to Israel. But rewind 77 years, Israel didn't exist. The Jewish diamond merchants who would build this empire were scattered across Europe, primarily Belgium, the Netherlands, and Germany, cutting and trading stones in traditional roles they'd held since the Middle Ages. When the Nazis invaded, they fled with whatever they could carry. Many had nothing but expertise, family connections, and desperation. The idea that these refugees would dominate the world's most exclusive commodity within a single generation seemed impossible. The gap between 1948 and today represents one of the most remarkable and least discussed business transformations in modern history. How did Holocaust survivors and Middle Eastern Jewish immigrants break into an industry monopolized by De Beers, the British South African cartel that had controlled diamond prices since 1888? How did they convince African mine owners to bypass established channels? How did they transform Tel Aviv from a backwater into the diamond capital of the world, surpassing Antwerp, London, and New York? What made them different wasn't just survival instinct or business acumen. The Israeli diamond tycoons weaponized something unique: the global Jewish diaspora network. They turned religious trust into commercial advantage. They used Israel's geopolitical position as both opportunity and shield. They embraced moral ambiguity that traditional dealers avoided, trading in conflict zones, partnering with questionable regimes, operating in legal gray areas. They moved faster, took bigger risks, and showed no loyalty to the old guard's gentlemen's agreements. Behind the success was a system built on 3 pillars that outsiders couldn't replicate. First, the Mamla team, Hebrew for men of state, a shadow network of traders who coordinated prices, shared intelligence, and crushed competition through collective action. Second, the Israeli government's quiet support, providing diplomatic cover, tax advantages, and strategic alignment that made Tel Aviv a safe haven for an industry increasingly scrutinized elsewhere. Third, the family dynasty structure, where businesses pass through generations, accumulating knowledge, relationships, and capital that no individual entrepreneur could match. This wasn't just about cutting diamonds. The Israeli tycoons understood that controlling supply chains matters more than controlling mines. De Beers owned the rough stones, but Israeli cutters became the essential middlemen who transformed rocks into luxury goods. They established cutting factories in Israel that became impossible to bypass. They financed African operations that loosened De Beers' grip. They pioneered the memo system, diamonds traded on consignment and trust that excluded outsiders from the market. Let me take you back to 1948, when a 28-year-old Belgian immigrant named Moshe Schnitzer arrived in Tel Aviv with a suitcase full of uncut diamonds and a vision that would change everything. His story, and the stories of families like the Levievs, Steinmetz and Gertlers, reveals how modern fortunes are built not through innovation or inheritance, but through systematic exploitation of networks, governments, and information asymmetries that the public never sees. But to understand how Israel's diamond tycoons built their empire, we need to go back to the smoking ruins of post-war Antwerp, where everything began. Chapter 1. Antwerp Origins. Before Israel dominated diamonds, there was Antwerp. For 4 centuries, Belgium's port city served as the diamond capital of Europe. The industry operated through tiny workshops in the Jewish quarter, where Hasidic cutters worked under dim lights, transforming rough stones into brilliance using techniques passed down through generations. By 1940, 85% of the world's diamonds moved through Antwerp's Pelikanstraat, a single street where deals worth millions happened daily, sealed with nothing but a handshake, and the Yiddish phrase Mazel und Brucha, luck and blessing. The Jewish dominance of diamond trading wasn't accidental. Medieval Christian prohibitions against moneylending pushed Jews into specialized trades that required portable skills and international networks. Diamonds fit perfectly, high value, small volume, requiring expertise rather than land or capital. Jewish merchants became the essential middlemen between Indian mines, the only source until the 1860s, and European royalty. When South African deposits were discovered in 1867, Jewish traders from Antwerp already had the infrastructure to cut, trade and distribute the sudden supply boom. This system worked because of trust. Unlike gold or currency, diamonds lack standardized value. A stone's worth depends on subjective assessment of cut, clarity, color, and carat weight. Without trust, every transaction requires expensive authentication. The Jewish diamond community solved this through insularity. They married within the trade, lived in the same neighborhoods, worshipped in the same synagogues, and enforced social penalties for fraud more severe than legal consequences. Cheating a fellow dealer meant excommunication from the only network that mattered. Moshe Schnitzer grew up in this world. Born in 1920 to a family of diamond cutters in Antwerp's Jewish quarter, he learned to grade stones before he learned algebra. His father operated a small workshop employing 12 craftsmen, cutting rough diamonds imported from De Beers' London sorting office. Young Moshe spent afternoons watching his father negotiate, noting how experienced dealers could assess a stone's value in seconds, how prices fluctuated based on whispered information, how the real power lay not with cutters, but with traders who controlled access to rough supply. You see, the diamond industry has always had a structural imbalance. Thousands of cutters and retailers compete for customers, but only one source controlled rough stones: De Beers. Founded by Cecil Rhodes in 1888, De Beers monopolized South African diamond production and established the Central Selling Organization, CSO, a cartel that purchased stones from independent mines, then rationed them to approved buyers at fixed prices. The CSO didn't negotiate. 10 times a year, selected dealers received invitations to sites in London, where De Beers presented boxes of rough stones on a take-it-or-leave-it basis. Refuse, and you'd never be invited back. Complain about quality or price, and your allocation would shrink. This system maintained artificial scarcity and stable prices, making De Beers and its allies immensely wealthy while keeping cutters and traders dependent. Antwerp's Jewish dealers accepted this arrangement because they had no alternative. Where else could they source diamonds? De Beers controlled 90% of global supply. Challenging the cartel meant business suicide. Then came May 1940. Nazi Germany invaded Belgium. The Wehrmacht reached Antwerp within 18 days. Moshe Schnitzer was 20 years old, working in his father's workshop when rumors of the invasion reached Pelikanstraat. The Jewish quarter erupted in panic. Dealers frantically sewed diamonds into coat linings, swallowed small stones, buried inventory in basements. The Schnitzers had perhaps 6 hours to decide: flee or hide. Moshe's father made a calculation that saved their lives. He gathered the family's entire inventory, approximately 4,000 carats of cut and rough diamonds worth over $200,000 at 1940 prices, and distributed them among family members. Moshe received a leather pouch containing 800 carats of rough stones, which he hid in a false-bottom suitcase. The family split up. Moshe and his younger brother would attempt to reach England. His parents would try to hide in the Belgian countryside with forged papers. The journey took 3 weeks. Moshe and his brother moved through occupied France using a resistance network that smuggled Jews toward Portugal, where neutral ships still sailed to Britain. They traveled at night, hid in barns and church basements, traded small diamonds for food and transportation. Half the group died, caught at checkpoints, betrayed by smugglers, killed by exposure. Moshe reached Lisbon in June 1940 with his brother, the suitcase, and nothing else. But England wasn't safe enough. The diamonds in Moshe's suitcase represented his family's entire wealth, and London was being bombed nightly. More importantly, Britain enforced strict currency controls and diamond import regulations that would trap his inventory in legal limbo. Moshe needed a destination where diamonds could move freely, where Jewish refugees were welcome, and where the chaos of war created business opportunities. In December 1940, Moshe Schnitzer boarded a ship to Palestine. The British Mandatory Territory was absorbing Jewish refugees by the thousands, and rumors circulated among the diamond trade that Tel Aviv, a small coastal city of 150,000 people, was becoming a trading post for stones smuggled out of Europe. Moshe arrived in February 1941 with 800 carats of rough diamonds, fluency in Yiddish, Dutch, and English, and expertise in cutting and grading. He was 21 years old. What he found in Tel Aviv was opportunity disguised as chaos. The British mandate enforced few commercial regulations. No diamond import duties existed. Jewish refugees with European connections and Sephardic Jews from Middle Eastern countries mixed in a desperate economy, starved for hard currency. Tel Aviv had no diamond infrastructure, no exchanges, no cutting factories, no established dealers. This meant no entrenched interests to protect their territory. Moshe set up a makeshift workshop in a Tel Aviv apartment, using hand tools smuggled from Belgium. He had no access to De Beers supply. The CSO didn't operate in Palestine. But war had fractured the diamond pipeline. Soldiers stole stones from African mines. Dealers in occupied territories sold inventory at desperate prices. Refugees like Moshe arrived with hidden diamonds they needed to convert into cash. A black market emerged, and Moshe positioned himself as the bridge between supply and demand. His first major deal happened in July 1941. A Polish refugee approached Moshe with 12 rough diamonds, clearly stolen from a Belgian dealer's inventory. The stones were high quality, probably worth $15,000 if sold through legitimate channels. But the refugee had no papers, no contacts, and needed money immediately. He offered the lot for $6,000 in cash. Moshe bought them. He had just enough capital from selling a portion of his own inventory. He cut and polished the stones over 3 weeks, then sold them to a British Army officer who collected diamonds as portable wealth. The profit? $7,000, more than his father had earned in a good year in Antwerp. The lesson? War had broken the old rules, and fortunes awaited those willing to operate in grey markets. But this wasn't the end of Moshe Schnitzer's journey. It was the beginning. By 1945, he would help establish Israel's first diamond exchange. By 1948, he would be coordinating supply chains from newly independent Israel to Europe and America. By 1960, he would lead the Israeli Diamond Manufacturers Association and negotiate directly with De Beers to break their monopoly. The question wasn't whether Israeli dealers would enter the diamond trade. The question was whether they would play by the old rules or write entirely new ones. Moshe Schnitzer and the network of refugee traders gathering in Tel Aviv were about to do something unprecedented. Challenge a century-old cartel, weaponize Jewish diaspora connections, and transform Israel into the diamond capital of the world within a single generation. But first, they needed a strategy that could overcome their complete lack of resources. They needed to turn disadvantage into advantage. They needed to build something De Beers couldn't see coming until it was too late. Chapter 2. Network strategy. By 1945, Tel Aviv had become a gathering point for diamond dealers from across the Jewish diaspora. War hadn't just destroyed Antwerp's infrastructure, it had scattered expertise across the globe. Belgian cutters ended up in London, New York, Palestine, and South Africa. The old geographic concentration of the trade dissolved. Moshe Schnitzer recognized that this dispersion wasn't a problem, it was an opportunity. If Israeli dealers could coordinate activity across multiple locations, they could create a network that bypassed De Beers' centralized control. The genius of what came next wasn't technical innovation. Israeli cutters didn't invent better diamond cutting techniques or discover new markets. Instead, they weaponized something competitors couldn't replicate: the global Jewish community's trust networks and family connections. They turned Judaism itself into a competitive advantage. Here's how it worked. Traditional diamond trading relied on established firms with centuries of reputation in cities like Antwerp, London, and Amsterdam. De Beers sold rough stones to these approved dealers, who cut and distributed them through equally established channels. Breaking into this system required capital, reputation, and access, things Israeli dealers lacked in 1945. But Israeli dealers had relatives. Moshe Schnitzer had cousins in New York who survived the war, brothers-in-law in London, former business partners from Antwerp, scattered across Europe. Every Israeli dealer had similar connections, family members, and community ties spanning continents. These relationships operated on trust mechanisms far stronger than legal contracts. You didn't cheat your cousin's business partner because doing so meant shame at family gatherings, exclusion from community events, and reputation destruction across the entire Jewish diamond network. The Israelis created what they called the family network system, an informal web of dealers coordinating supply, prices, and information across borders. Here's a specific example of how it functioned. In 1947, an Israeli dealer named Zvi Rosenberg received a shipment of rough diamonds from a Belgian contact, stones that had bypassed De Beers' CSO through black market channels in Antwerp. Rosenberg cut the stones in Tel Aviv, then sent half to his brother in New York and half to a cousin in Johannesburg. The brother sold stones to American retailers. The cousin sold stones to South African jewelers. Profits returned to Tel Aviv, where Rosenberg used them to purchase more rough stones. This triangular trading pattern, Tel Aviv Cutting Center, international sales through family contacts, profits reinvested in rough supply, became the standard Israeli model. It had three critical advantages over traditional channels. First, it operated faster. De Beers held rough stones in inventory to maintain scarcity, releasing them slowly through quarterly sites. Israeli dealers moved inventory immediately, turning capital over multiple times per year. Speed generated higher returns on invested capital. Second, it bypassed commission layers. Traditional diamond distribution involved multiple middlemen, rough dealers, cutters, wholesale traders, retailers, each taking percentages. The family network collapsed these layers. The same family controlled cutting, wholesale, and retail connections, capturing margins at every stage. Third, it created information asymmetry. De Beers controlled information about supply, how many diamonds existed, where they came from, what they cost to mine. But Israeli dealers shared information about demand. If a New York family member reported high demand for certain diamond sizes and qualities, Tel Aviv cutters could focus on those specifications. This demand-side intelligence made Israeli dealers more responsive to market conditions than De Beers' rigid supply system. Look at the numbers. In 1945, Palestine had perhaps 300 people employed in diamond cutting and trading, generating maybe $2 million in annual revenue, essentially a rounding error in the global diamond trade. By 1950, newly independent Israel had 2,000 diamond workers generating over $20 million annually. By 1955, Israel had 12,000 diamond workers and controlled roughly 15% of global diamond cutting. The growth was exponential, but raw numbers don't tell the full story. What the Israeli dealers built wasn't just a bigger piece of the existing pie. They were changing how the pie was divided. They introduced new business practices that traditional dealers found distasteful but couldn't ignore. The most revolutionary innovation was the memo system, trading diamonds on consignment without upfront payment. Here's how traditional diamond trading worked. A cutter purchased rough stones from De Beers, processed them, then sold finished stones to wholesalers who paid cash. Every transaction involved immediate payment. This requirement locked capital in inventory and limited trading to established dealers with substantial cash reserves. Israeli dealers invented an alternative. They would send diamonds to other dealers on memo. Essentially take these stones, show them to potential buyers, sell them if you can, return them if you can't, and we'll settle payment later. This system required absolute trust because stones worth thousands of dollars moved internationally with nothing but a handwritten note as documentation. But within the Jewish diamond network, trust wasn't the problem. Trust was the foundation. The memo system had explosive implications. Young dealers with minimal capital could enter the trade. A 25-year-old in Tel Aviv with expertise, but no cash reserves, could receive stones on memo from an established dealer, sell them to international contacts, also on memo, and build a business with essentially zero capital. The barriers to entry collapsed. Traditional dealers hated the memo system. It increased competition, reduced margins, and required trusting people outside immediate business circles. De Beers particularly despised it because the system made tracking diamond flows nearly impossible. How could De Beers maintain monopoly control when stones moved globally on undocumented consignment? But the memo system offered Israeli dealers decisive advantages in the post-war diamond boom. American demand for diamonds exploded in the 1950s as GIs returned home and married in record numbers. De Beers' rigid supply system couldn't respond quickly to demand surges. Israeli dealers, operating through family networks and memo trading, could flood markets with inventory when prices spiked, then withdraw when markets softened. They operated like arbitrage traders, exploiting inefficiencies in De Beers' controlled system. Moshe Schnitzer became the architect of this network strategy. By 1948, when Israel declared independence, Schnitzer had established connections in 23 countries. He formalized what had been informal cooperation by creating the Israel Diamond Manufacturers Association in 1948, a trade group that coordinated cutting standards, price information, and rough stone purchases among Israeli dealers. The organization wasn't just a business association, it was an intelligence-sharing network. Here's what's interesting. The association operated with near-zero transparency. Members shared information about rough stone prices, cutting costs, and international demand, but only with other members. Outsiders, including De Beers, had no visibility into Israeli operations. This information asymmetry gave Israeli dealers pricing advantages. When negotiating rough stone purchases, they knew exactly what margins were possible because they had real-time data from dozens of dealers. De Beers negotiated blind. The network strategy created compound advantages. As more Israeli dealers succeeded internationally, they sponsored immigration of family members and former associates from Europe. Between 1948 and 1960, approximately 15,000 diamond workers immigrated to Israel, mostly Jews from Belgium, the Netherlands, and North Africa. Each immigrant brought contacts, expertise, and international relationships. The network grew exponentially, but the network faced a critical limitation: access to rough stones. De Beers still controlled 90% of global rough supply through the CSO. Israeli dealers could optimize cutting and distribution, but without raw material, the entire system would collapse. De Beers, recognizing the competitive threat from Israeli dealers, began restricting their access to rough stones. Fewer Israelis received invitations to London sites. Allocations to Israeli dealers shrank. The crisis came to a head in 1952. De Beers reduced Israeli rough allocations by 40%, claiming inventory management concerns. In reality, De Beers was trying to strangle the Israeli trade by cutting off supply. Established Antwerp and London dealers celebrated. The upstarts from Tel Aviv would be forced back into subordinate positions. Moshe Schnitzer called an emergency meeting of the Israel Diamond Manufacturers Association in September 1952. 37 dealers gathered in a Tel Aviv office. The situation appeared desperate. Without rough stones, Israeli cutting factories would shut down within months. Thousands of workers would lose jobs. The entire Israeli diamond experiment seemed finished. But Schnitzer had been preparing for this moment. He had spent the previous 2 years cultivating relationships that would change everything. He had traveled to Africa, not to De Beers' operations in South Africa, but to newly independent African nations with diamond deposits outside De Beers' control. He had met with government officials, mine owners, and local businessmen. He had offered something De Beers never provided: direct partnerships that bypassed colonial-era trading relationships. Schnitzer revealed his solution. Israeli dealers would source rough stones directly from African mines, cutting De Beers out entirely. The plan seemed absurd. How would small-scale Israeli traders convince African governments to defy the most powerful cartel in the commodities business? What could Israel offer that De Beers couldn't? The answer would emerge over the next decade, as Israeli diamond tycoons executed one of the boldest strategies in business history. They would break De Beers' monopoly by turning Israel into Africa's preferred partner. They would use government connections, technological assistance, and military cooperation to secure diamond supplies outside the cartel's control. They would prove that the old system could be challenged. But the strategy would come with costs, ethical costs that haunt the Israeli diamond trade to this day. The relationships Israeli dealers forged in Africa during the 1950s and 1960s would entangle them in some of the continent's darkest conflicts. Chapter 3. Cartel Breaking. In November 1952, Moshe Schnitzer boarded a plane to Monrovia, Liberia, carrying a proposal that would reshape the global diamond trade. Liberia had recently discovered diamond deposits in its northeastern territories, but the country lacked capital, expertise, and international connections to develop them. De Beers had offered Liberia the standard arrangement. The company would purchase all rough production at De Beers prices, processed through the CSO in London. Liberian officials would receive fixed royalties, take it or leave it. Schnitzer offered an alternative. Israeli dealers would provide mining equipment, cutting expertise, and direct access to American and European markets, bypassing De Beers entirely. Instead of fixed royalties, Liberia would receive percentage partnerships in cutting operations, giving the government ongoing revenue from value-added processing rather than one-time extraction payments. The Liberian government would maintain sovereign control over its resources, while Israeli expertise transformed rough stones into finished products. The proposal succeeded because it aligned with post-colonial sensitivities. African nations gaining independence in the 1950s resented colonial-era arrangements that extracted raw materials while keeping processing and profits in European hands. De Beers represented the old system: European control, African subordination. Israeli dealers, by contrast, came from a newly independent nation that had itself fought for freedom from British rule. The symbolism mattered. But symbolism alone wouldn't have worked. Israeli dealers sweetened offers with elements De Beers couldn't or wouldn't provide. They shared cutting expertise, training African workers in diamond processing instead of hoarding technical knowledge. They offered partnership structures instead of pure extraction contracts. Most critically, they provided diplomatic and military assistance from the Israeli government, a package deal that integrated diamond trading with broader strategic relationships. Here's how the full strategy worked. The Israeli government, led by Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion, wanted international allies to counter Arab nations' numerical advantage in the United Nations and regional politics. African nations, particularly those gaining independence, represented potential partners. Israel offered technical assistance programs that sent engineers, agricultural experts, and military advisors to African countries. These programs built goodwill while establishing channels for Israeli businesses to access African resources. Diamond deals became embedded in this broader diplomatic framework. When Israeli dealers negotiated diamond supplies, they weren't just offering commercial terms. They were offering Israeli government backing, technical assistance programs, and strategic partnerships. African leaders understood that selling diamonds to Israeli dealers meant access to Israeli expertise, military equipment, and diplomatic support. De Beers offered money. Israel offered relationships. The Liberia Agreement, finalized in March 1953, established the template. Liberia granted Israeli dealers exclusive rights to purchase rough production from two major diamond fields. Israeli companies established cutting factories in Monrovia, employing local workers trained by Israeli experts. The arrangement generated far more revenue for Liberia than De Beers's standard contracts, while giving Israeli dealers access to approximately 500,000 carats annually, enough rough supply to sustain their operations independent of the CSO. De Beers' response was immediate and aggressive. The company dispatched representatives to Monrovia, offering Liberia doubled royalty payments if they cancelled the Israeli arrangement. British and South African diplomats pressured Liberian officials, warning of economic consequences. De Beers circulated rumors that Israeli-cut Liberian diamonds were substandard quality, attempting to damage their market reputation. The pressure campaign failed. Liberian President William Tubman, having already signed agreements with Israeli dealers, refused to backtrack. The Israeli government quietly signaled that breaking the agreements would cost Liberia access to Israeli technical assistance programs. More importantly, the financial results validated the partnership. Liberia earned more from diamond revenues in the first year of Israeli cooperation than in the previous 5 years under De Beers' system. Schnitzer replicated the Liberian model across Africa. Between 1953 and 1960, Israeli dealers secured supply agreements with diamond-producing regions in Sierra Leone, Ghana, Central African Republic, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Each agreement followed the same pattern: partnership structures instead of pure purchase contracts, Israeli government involvement providing diplomatic cover, and emphasis on technology transfer and training. The numbers tell the story. In 1952, Israeli dealers sourced roughly 15% of their rough stones outside De Beers' CSO. By 1960, that figure reached 65%. Israeli cutting factories processed over 8 million carats annually by 1960, making Israel the world's largest diamond cutting center by volume, surpassing Antwerp. The cartel had been broken, not through direct confrontation, but through patient construction of alternative supply channels. De Beers executives were forced to adapt. In 1957, the CSO began inviting more Israeli dealers to London sites, offering better allocations and terms. Why? Because excluding Israeli dealers no longer hurt them. It hurt De Beers. Israeli-cut African diamonds were flooding markets, and De Beers needed Israeli cooperation to maintain any control over supply chains. The power dynamic had flipped. But the African strategy came with ethical costs that Israeli dealers preferred not to discuss. The Democratic Republic of Congo agreement, negotiated in 1958, illustrates the moral ambiguity. The Congo had rich diamond deposits in Kasai province, but the region was politically unstable. Belgian colonial authorities had recently withdrawn, and multiple factions fought for control. One faction, led by a local leader named Albert Kalonji, declared the autonomous mining state of South Kasai in 1960, a breakaway region that claimed sovereignty over diamond fields. Israeli dealers, led by businessman Maurice Tempelsman, operating between New York and Israel, negotiated directly with Kalonji's rebel government, agreeing to purchase rough diamond production in exchange for cash payments that funded the separatist movement. The arrangement was clearly illegal under international law. The Central Congolese government never authorized the deals, but legality mattered less than access. Tempelsman and his Israeli partners sourced hundreds of thousands of carats from South Kasai, while the region descended into conflict that killed tens of thousands. The South Kasai arrangement established patterns that would haunt the diamond trade for decades. Israeli dealers willing to operate in conflict zones, partner with questionable regimes, and prioritize diamond access over ethical concerns. The justification was always the same: if Israeli dealers didn't purchase the stones, someone else would. Better that diamonds fund Israeli businesses and African partners than enrich European colonial interests or Russian competitors who were actively pursuing African diamond supplies for their own industries. This reasoning was self-serving but not entirely wrong. Israeli diamond operations genuinely did transfer more value to African partners than De Beers' colonial-era contracts. Training programs established in Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Ghana created African diamond expertise that outlasted the Israeli presence. Partnership models gave African governments direct stakes in profitable cutting operations rather than just mining royalties. But these positive outcomes existed alongside darker realities. Israeli dealers' willingness to operate in conflict zones, ignore international law, and partner with authoritarian regimes made them valuable customers for diamonds that couldn't be sold through legitimate channels. As African independence movements turned violent in the 1960s, Israeli dealers became reliable buyers for stones from disputed territories. The most revealing example involved Israeli arms sales to African nations. Starting in the late 1950s, Israel's defense industry began exporting weapons to newly independent African states, often paid for with diamond concessions rather than cash. A 1962 agreement with Sierra Leone exchanged Israeli Uzi submachine guns and military training for exclusive diamond purchasing rights in 2 mining regions. The weapons fueled Sierra Leone's internal conflicts, while diamonds flowed to Tel Aviv. These arrangements made strategic sense for Israel. The young nation needed international allies, export markets for its growing defense industry, and resources to build its economy. Diamond deals served all 3 goals simultaneously. But the strategy normalized relationships between Israeli businesses and African conflicts, relationships that would later be exposed as blood diamond connections when similar patterns emerged in Angolan and Sierra Leonean civil wars during the 1990s. By 1960, Israeli dealers controlled approximately 25% of global rough diamond supply, an astounding achievement for an industry that barely existed 15 years earlier. They had broken De Beers' monopoly, established Israel as the cutting center of the diamond world, and built supply relationships that would sustain Israeli diamond dominance for decades. But controlling supply was only half the equation. The Israeli dealers needed a physical center, a geographic hub where diamonds could be cut, traded, and distributed with maximum efficiency and minimum government interference. They needed a place where the rules could be written specifically to advantage Israeli dealers over international competitors. They needed Ramat Gan, the diamond exchange that would become a country unto itself. Chapter 4. Ramat Gan. In 1961, the Israeli government allocated 42 acres of land in Ramat Gan, a working-class suburb east of Tel Aviv, for construction of a dedicated diamond exchange complex. The project represented unprecedented government support for private industry. The land came at subsidized prices. The Israeli Diamond Manufacturers Association received tax exemptions for exchange operations. Building permits bypassed normal regulatory processes. The message was clear. Israel's government viewed diamond trading as critical national infrastructure, not just private business. Why such aggressive government backing? Follow the money. By 1960, diamonds accounted for approximately 30% of Israel's total export revenue, over $200 million annually, from an economy struggling to absorb mass immigration and maintain military readiness against hostile neighbors. Diamond exports generated hard currency that Israel desperately needed to purchase foreign equipment, pay debts, and stabilize its currency. The diamond industry employed over 15,000 workers, mostly recent immigrants who might otherwise require state welfare support. But the benefits went beyond economics. Diamond trading provided Israel with international business connections that translated into diplomatic leverage. Israeli dealers had partnerships in 43 countries by 1960, including nations that didn't formally recognize Israel or maintain diplomatic relations. Diamond business opened doors that formal diplomacy couldn't. When African nations needed technical assistance or military equipment, Israeli dealers facilitated connections. When European companies wanted access to Israeli diamond inventory, the exchanges strengthened trade relationships. The Ramat Gan project aimed to concentrate these advantages in a single purpose-built facility. The designers studied diamond exchanges in Antwerp, London, and New York, then improved on each model. They created an integrated complex where cutters, traders, and exporters could operate in adjacent spaces, minimizing transportation time and security costs. They installed state-of-the-art security systems, multiple checkpoint layers, armed guards, X-ray equipment, and vault storage capable of holding billions of dollars in diamond inventory. Most critically, they designed Ramat Gan as a regulatory special zone. Normal Israeli commercial law applied loosely inside the exchange. Customs officials had limited authority. Tax reporting requirements were simplified to the point of meaninglessness. The exchange operated semi-autonomously, governed by the Israel Diamond Manufacturers Association rather than standard government agencies. The first tower of the Israel Diamond Exchange opened in April 1968. The complex featured 12 floors of trading rooms, cutting workshops and vault facilities. 223 dealers leased spaces in the initial opening. Within 6 months, trading volume exceeded $300 million, making Ramat Gan the world's busiest diamond exchange by transaction value, surpassing both Antwerp and New York. What made Ramat Gan successful wasn't infrastructure, it was legal arbitrage. The exchange's regulatory exemptions created massive competitive advantages. Here's a specific example. In traditional diamond centers, dealers paid value-added taxes on each transaction. In Antwerp, the VAT reached 21% by the 1970s. In New York, sales taxes and import duties added complexity and costs. At Ramat Gan, diamond transactions inside the exchange were effectively tax-free. The Israeli government justified this exemption by arguing that diamonds moved through Israel for cutting and re-export, making taxation administratively difficult. The real reason was simpler. Tax exemptions made Ramat Gan the cheapest place in the world to trade diamonds. The arbitrage opportunity became a flood of international dealers relocating operations to Ramat Gan. Antwerp dealers opened Israeli subsidiaries. New York traders established cutting partnerships in Tel Aviv. By 1975, Ramat Gan had over 800 registered dealers, a threefold increase in 7 years. The exchange expanded to 4 interconnected towers by 1978, becoming the massive complex that dominates today. But the growth created opacity that enabled questionable practices. The light touch regulation that made Ramat Gan attractive for legitimate business also made it perfect for money laundering, tax evasion, and sanctions busting. Diamonds worth millions moved through the exchange with minimal documentation. Cash transactions happened daily, with no reporting requirements. The exchange's semi-autonomous status meant Israeli police and tax authorities rarely investigated activities inside the complex. Look at the round-tripping schemes that became standard practice. A European dealer would sell diamonds to an Israeli partner, recording a low transaction price to minimize European taxes. The Israeli partner would cut and polish the stones, often doing minimal work, then re-export them to the original European dealer at a much higher price. The price increase appeared legitimate, cutting added value. But the real goal was shifting profits from high-tax European jurisdictions to low-tax Israel. The European dealer deducted the purchase as a business expense. The Israeli dealer paid minimal Israeli taxes, and profits accumulated in Israeli accounts. These schemes were technically legal, or at least existed in gray zones where legality was ambiguous. Israeli authorities showed little interest in investigating because the schemes generated tax revenue and employment. European authorities struggled to prove violations because transactions happened behind Ramat Gan's security perimeter, where they had no jurisdiction. The opacity attracted criminals alongside legitimate traders. In 1973, Italian police discovered that mafia-linked organizations were using Ramat Gan to launder drug profits. The scheme was elegant. Criminals purchased diamonds in Israel using cash, exported the stones to Italy as legitimate business inventory, then sold them for clean funds. Italian authorities requested Israeli cooperation, investigating the transactions. Israeli officials politely declined, citing privacy protections and the exchange's regulatory autonomy. This pattern repeated throughout the 1970s and 1980s. International law enforcement agencies repeatedly identified Ramat Gan as a hub for money laundering, tax evasion, and sanctions violations. Israeli authorities consistently failed to cooperate with investigations, protecting the exchange's autonomy and, by extension, its competitive advantages. The most brazen example involved South African sanctions. After apartheid South Africa faced international isolation in the 1980s, many countries banned trade with the regime. But South African diamonds continued flowing to global markets through Israeli middlemen. South African dealers sold rough stones to Israeli partners, who cut and re-exported them as Israeli diamonds. The diamond's origin became untraceable, allowing South African production to circumvent sanctions. Israeli dealers earned fees facilitating the transactions, while South Africa maintained market access. The United Nations and various governments demanded Israel close this sanctions-busting channel. Israeli officials responded with bureaucratic delays and technical objections, never actually enforcing restrictions. Why? Because South Africa remained a critical diamond source. Israeli cutting factories depended on South African rough stones. Enforcing sanctions would have cost Israeli dealers billions, while achieving little since other countries, Belgium, India, would simply replace Israel as the middleman. This calculation revealed the core logic governing Ramat Gan. National interest, as defined by diamond industry revenues, trumped international pressure or ethical concerns. The Israeli government had made a strategic decision to support the diamond industry, whatever the costs to international reputation or legal compliance. But the strategy had internal critics. In 1979, Israeli investigative journalist Yoav Carney published a series of articles exposing money laundering at Ramat Gan. Carney documented specific cases where criminal organizations used the exchange to process illicit funds. He interviewed former dealers who described the informal rules. Don't ask where cash comes from, don't report suspicious transactions, don't cooperate with foreign investigators. The articles generated brief controversy, but no policy changes. The Israel Diamond Manufacturers Association dismissed Carney's reporting as exaggerated and potentially anti-Semitic. Critics of Israeli diamond dealers often faced such accusations, weaponizing real anti-Semitism to deflect legitimate criticism. By 1980, Ramat Gan had achieved something unprecedented. It was simultaneously the world's most successful diamond exchange and the industry's most problematic regulatory black hole. Legitimate dealers used the exchange for its efficiency and cost advantages. Criminals used the same infrastructure for money laundering. International dealers used tax arbitrage schemes that existed in legal gray zones. And the Israeli government protected it all, viewing diamond revenues as too important to risk, with aggressive regulation. The question was how long this arrangement could last. The 1980s would bring new challenges: conflict diamonds from African civil wars, international pressure campaigns targeting blood diamond trade, and technological changes threatening traditional cutting operations. Ramat Gan's opacity and government protection had built a global empire, but those same attributes would eventually become liabilities. As the world demanded transparency, the Israeli diamond industry was unwilling to provide. But before those reckonings arrived, the Israeli diamond tycoons reached their peak power. The 1980s represented the zenith of Israeli diamond dominance, families controlling billions, political influence extending to the highest levels of Israeli government, and business practices operating beyond the reach of international law. The next chapter of the story reveals how deep those government ties ran and what they enabled. Chapter 5. Conflict Diamonds. Monrovia, Liberia, in 1989. Charles Taylor's rebel forces crossed from Ivory Coast on Christmas Eve, launching a civil war that would kill over 200,000 people and destroy Liberia's government. Within 6 weeks, Taylor's National Patriotic Front controlled 70% of Liberia's territory, including all major diamond mining regions. International observers expected diamond production to collapse. Instead, it accelerated. By March 1990, rough diamonds from Taylor-controlled regions were appearing in international markets at volumes exceeding pre-war levels. Where were the diamonds going? The answer was simple and disturbing. Israel, specifically, to dealers operating through Ramat Gan who had maintained relationships with Liberian contacts since the 1950s. These dealers adapted to the new reality with remarkable speed. Instead of buying from Liberian government officials, who no longer controlled diamond regions, they bought from Taylor's rebel organization. The stones were the same, the prices were actually better. Taylor needed cash to fund military operations and offered discounted rates for buyers willing to ignore the source. Israeli dealer Leonid Minin became the primary channel for Taylor's diamonds. Minin, a Ukrainian-Israeli who had operated diamond businesses in West Africa since the 1970s, established direct relationships with Taylor's lieutenants. According to later UN investigations, Minin purchased approximately 600,000 carats of rough diamonds from Taylor-controlled mines between 1990 and 1992, paying roughly $40 million, cash delivered in briefcases, to rebel-held territory. In exchange, Minin received diamonds that he transported via private aircraft to Tel Aviv, where they entered Ramat Gan's trading system with minimal scrutiny. The diamonds Taylor sold funded weapons purchases. Minin and other dealers weren't just buying diamonds, they were financing a civil war. The UN would later document that Taylor used diamond revenues to purchase arms from Eastern European suppliers, equipment that enabled his forces to commit systematic atrocities. The Israeli diamond dealers who purchased Taylor's stones were, by any reasonable moral standard, complicit in war crimes. But complicity required acknowledgement, and acknowledgement threatened profits. Israeli dealers developed sophisticated denial mechanisms. The primary defense was opacity, claim ignorance about diamond origins. When confronted about Liberian purchases, dealers insisted they didn't know stones came from rebel-controlled areas. They bought from independent suppliers who didn't disclose sources. The diamonds arrived through legitimate channels, dealers with proper Israeli import licenses, making them clean in technical legal sense. This defense was transparently dishonest. Israeli dealers had operated in Liberia for 40 years. They maintained relationships with local partners who obviously knew the situation on the ground. Dealers like Minin personally traveled to Taylor-controlled territory, hardly consistent with claims of ignorance, but proving knowledge in court required documentation that didn't exist by design and testimony from dealers who invoked privacy protections. The Liberian situation wasn't unique. Similar patterns emerged across Africa during the 1990s. In Angola, Israeli dealers purchased diamonds from UNITA rebels fighting the government, stones that financed Jonas Savimbi's brutal insurgency. In Sierra Leone, Revolutionary United Front, RUF, rebels controlled diamond fields and sold production through Lebanese and Israeli middlemen. In Democratic Republic of Congo, multiple armed factions sold diamonds to finance ethnic conflicts that killed millions. The common thread was Israeli dealers' willingness to purchase diamonds from conflict zones without asking difficult questions. This willingness made them essential partners for armed groups that needed to convert diamonds into weapons. De Beers refused to buy conflict diamonds. At least officially, the reality was more complex. Western dealers faced domestic pressure and media scrutiny. Israeli dealers, operating through Ramat Gan's opaque system with minimal government oversight, provided the crucial outlet. The scale of conflict diamond trading through Israel during the 1990s is difficult to quantify precisely, which was exactly the point of the system's design. But credible estimates from UN investigations suggest that 40 to 55% of rough diamonds from conflict zones entered international markets through Israeli dealers during the 1990s. In dollar terms, that represents approximately $4 billion in conflict diamond purchases by Israeli traders between 1990 and 2000. These purchases funded some of history's worst recent atrocities. The Sierra Leone Civil War, heavily financed by diamond sales to Israeli dealers, featured systematic mutilation campaigns where RUF rebels amputated civilians' limbs to terrorize populations. The Angolan conflict, sustained by diamond revenues, involved UNITA forces using child soldiers and conducting mass civilian killings. The Israeli dealers who purchased these stones claimed they were just businessmen making legitimate trades. They were in fact instrumental to conflicts that killed hundreds of thousands. International pressure finally forced acknowledgement. In 1998, Canadian diplomat Robert Fowler chaired a UN investigation into diamond-funded conflicts in Angola. The Fowler Report, released in March 2000, explicitly named Israeli dealers, including specific individuals and companies operating through Ramat Gan, as primary purchasers of UNITA diamonds. The report documented flight manifests, bank transactions, and testimony from Angolan officials proving Israeli complicity. The Fowler Report created the first real public relations crisis for Israeli diamond dealers. International NGOs, led by Global Witness and Partnership Africa Canada, launched campaigns targeting blood diamonds. Celebrities like Leonardo DiCaprio, whose 2006 film Blood Diamond dramatized the issue, brought mainstream attention. Suddenly, consumers asking jewelers about diamond origins actually cared about the answers. The industry's response was the Kimberly Process Certification Scheme, established in 2003. The Kimberly process required participating countries to certify diamond origins, preventing conflict stones from entering legitimate markets. Each rough diamond shipment needed documentation proving it came from conflict-free sources. Participating countries agreed to trade only with other Kimberly process members, creating a closed system that theoretically excluded conflict diamonds. Israel joined the Kimberly process immediately, not because Israeli dealers supported transparency, but because exclusion would have been economically catastrophic. If major diamond consumers, United States, European Union, Japan, only accepted Kimberly-certified stones, Israeli dealers needed certification to access markets. But the Kimberly process had massive loopholes that Israeli dealers exploited. The certification applied to rough diamonds, stones in their natural state before cutting. Once cut and polished, diamonds lost their identity. A conflict stone from Angola, once cut in Tel Aviv, became an Israeli diamond with clean paperwork. The Kimberly process couldn't track polished stones' origins. More fundamentally, the Kimberly process relied on participating governments to honestly certify their diamonds' origins. Corrupt governments simply certified conflict stones as legitimate production. Israeli dealers working with African partners could secure Kimberly certificates for conflict stones by paying appropriate bribes to officials who controlled certification in source countries. The result was a system that provided public relations cover without substantially changing business practices. Israeli dealers could claim Kimberly process compliance while continuing to purchase stones from questionable sources, as long as paperwork appeared legitimate. International investigators documented numerous cases of conflict diamonds receiving false Kimberly certifications, then entering markets through Israeli dealers who knew or should have known the documentation was fraudulent. The most damning evidence came from Zimbabwe in 2008. Military forces seized control of the Marange diamond fields, killing over 200 miners and displacing thousands. Zimbabwean diamonds clearly qualified as conflict stones under any reasonable definition. Yet Zimbabwe received Kimberly process certification, and Israeli dealers purchased Marange diamonds throughout 2009 to 2012. When confronted, Israeli dealers pointed to Kimberly certificates as proof of legitimacy, ignoring overwhelming evidence of atrocities at Marange. Global Witness withdrew from the Kimberly process in 2011, declaring it a failed system that provided cover for continued conflict diamond trade. The organization specifically identified Israeli dealers as the primary purchasers of certified stones from conflict zones, noting that Ramat Gan's opacity made tracking impossible. But here's the paradox. While Israeli dealers' conflict diamond connections damaged the industry's reputation, they also reinforced Israeli dominance. Dealers willing to purchase questionable stones gained access to supplies competitors avoided. While ethical dealers lost African sources, Israeli dealers maintained them. The moral flexibility that made Israeli dealers complicit in atrocities also gave them competitive advantages. By 2010, Israel cut and traded over 60% of global rough diamond production by volume, the highest market share in Israeli diamond history. The conflict diamond scandals had briefly threatened that position, but the Kimberly process's inadequate enforcement allowed business as usual behind a veneer of reform. The Israeli diamond families who built fortunes purchasing conflict stones faced no criminal prosecution. No assets were frozen. No major dealer lost operating licenses. The worst consequence was reputational damage that primarily affected the broader industry rather than specific individuals. This impunity wasn't accidental. It reflected deep political connections between Israeli diamond tycoons and Israel's government. Those connections, forged over decades, meant that diamond dealers operated under political protection that shielded them from accountability. Understanding how those political relationships functioned requires examining the next chapter, the intricate ties between Israel's diamond families and the nation's political elite. Chapter 6. Global Monopoly. By 1995, Israeli dealers controlled 65% of global rough diamond cutting by volume and 40% by value. The distinction matters. Israeli factories specialized in smaller, lower-value stones that required labor-intensive cutting, while larger, premium stones still went to Antwerp and New York for specialized cutting. But volume dominance meant Israeli dealers touched the majority of diamonds entering consumer markets, a level of control unprecedented in the post-De Beers era. This monopoly position wasn't achieved through superior quality or innovation in cutting techniques. Israeli cut diamonds weren't better than Antwerp or Indian alternatives. The monopoly existed because Israeli dealers had systematically constructed barriers that competitors couldn't overcome. Understanding these barriers reveals how modern monopolies function, not through traditional market dominance, but through network effects, regulatory arbitrage, and strategic partnerships that make competition economically irrational. The first barrier was the integration of supply and distribution chains. Israeli dealers didn't just cut diamonds, they controlled multiple stages of the value chain simultaneously. A typical Israeli diamond family would have operations in Africa, sourcing rough stones, cutting factories in Israel processing them, wholesale operations in New York and Antwerp distributing finished stones, and retail connections selling to consumers. This vertical integration meant Israeli dealers captured margins at every stage, while competitors specialized in single segments. Consider the Steinmetz family as a case study. Benny Steinmetz inherited a diamond trading business from his father in the 1970s and expanded it into a vertically integrated empire. By 2000, Steinmetz controlled diamond mining operations in Angola and Sierra Leone, cutting factories in Ramat Gan employing over 800 workers, wholesale offices in Antwerp and New York, and retail partnerships with luxury brands like Tiffany & Co. A diamond moving through Steinmetz's operations generated profits 6 times greater than selling rough stones to independent cutters. This integration created cost advantages competitors couldn't match. When rough diamond prices spiked, as happened in 1996 and 2004, vertically integrated Israeli dealers absorbed costs at the cutting stage and recouped them at retail. Independent cutters without distribution channels had to sell to wholesalers at whatever prices the market would bear, often operating at losses during volatile periods. The second barrier was information asymmetry. Israeli dealers operating through family networks and the Israel Diamond Manufacturers Association shared price information, supply forecasts, and demand intelligence. This coordination wasn't exactly price fixing, which would be illegal, but it created de facto collusion. When discussing sales strategies at industry gatherings or family events, Israeli dealers aligned their approaches to maximize collective leverage. Specific example: in 2001, Israeli dealers coordinated a supply reduction to markets experiencing price softness. Dealers simultaneously reduced polished stone releases by approximately 30% across October and November. This coordinated supply restriction supported prices until demand recovered in December. No explicit conspiracy was needed. Dealers simply observed each other's behavior and adjusted accordingly, confident that family and community connections would prevent defection. Independent dealers lacked this coordination capacity. An Antwerp cutter considering supply restrictions had no assurance competitors would follow suit. Israeli dealers operated within trust networks that enforced collective discipline through social mechanisms, reputation, family relationships, community standing, that transcended pure economic incentives. The third barrier was government support that extended beyond Ramat Gan's regulatory exemptions. The Israeli government provided diamond dealers with diplomatic assistance, export credits, and strategic intelligence that private businesses in other countries couldn't access. When Israeli dealers negotiated in African countries, Israeli embassies facilitated meetings with government officials. When dealers needed financing for large purchases, Israeli government-backed banks provided credit lines at below-market rates. When dealers faced legal problems abroad, Israeli diplomatic pressure often secured favorable outcomes. This government support reflected the diamond industry's strategic importance to Israel. By 2000, diamond exports represented approximately 23% of Israeli industrial exports, excluding high-tech, generating over $5 billion annually. The industry employed over 25,000 workers directly and another 50,000 in supporting roles. Israeli policymakers viewed diamond trading as critical national infrastructure, justifying government involvement that would be inappropriate for typical commercial businesses. The most controversial government support involved Israeli intelligence services. According to former Mossad officials who spoke with Israeli journalists in the 2010s, Israeli intelligence actively assisted diamond dealers with African operations. Mossad provided security assessments for dealers working in conflict zones, intelligence about competing traders' activities, and in some cases, direct intervention when dealers faced threats. These services were officially justified as protecting Israeli citizens abroad, but the practical effect was giving Israeli dealers competitive intelligence and security capabilities competitors lacked. The fourth barrier was financial engineering that exploited international tax systems. Israeli dealers pioneered complex ownership structures that minimized tax obligations across multiple jurisdictions. A typical structure involved Israeli cutting companies owned by holding companies in Luxembourg or Netherlands, jurisdictions with favorable tax treaties with Israel, which were in turn owned by trusts in Channel Islands or British Virgin Islands. Profits flowed through these entities, taxed minimally at each stage, accumulating in offshore accounts. These structures were technically legal, but ethically questionable. Israeli dealers paid effective tax rates of 5 to 7% on diamond trading profits during the 1990s and 2000s, far below statutory rates in countries where they operated. The lost tax revenue represented public subsidies for private businesses, yet Israeli dealers faced minimal criticism because their tax engineering primarily affected foreign governments' revenues rather than Israeli coffers. Independent dealers couldn't replicate these structures without access to sophisticated tax planning and jurisdictions willing to accommodate aggressive structures. The largest Israeli diamond families employed full-time tax professionals and lawyers who did nothing but optimize corporate structures. A small Antwerp dealer lacked resources for such planning, effectively competing with one hand tied behind his back. The fifth barrier was market power in polished diamond sales. By controlling 65% of cutting volume, Israeli dealers collectively influenced polished diamond prices globally. If Israeli dealers decided certain diamond sizes or qualities were underpriced, they could withhold supply until prices improved. Individual wholesalers and retailers had little leverage to resist. If they didn't accept Israeli dealers' prices, they'd struggle to source inventory since alternative suppliers controlled only 35% of the market. This market power manifested in the asking price system that dominated polished diamond trading by 2000. Instead of negotiating each transaction individually, Israeli dealers published asking prices, essentially take-it-or-leave-it offers for standard diamond specifications. Wholesalers could accept the asking price or go without inventory. The asking price system eliminated negotiation, transferring all pricing power to Israeli dealers. Consider the profit implications. In 1985, before Israeli monopoly consolidation, cutting margins, the difference between rough stone costs and polished stone sales prices, averaged approximately 12 to 15%. By 2000, after Israeli dealers achieved market dominance, cutting margins averaged 22 to 26%. The margin expansion represented pure monopoly rent, profits extracted through market power rather than operational efficiency or quality improvements. These five barriers, vertical integration, information asymmetry, government support, financial engineering, and market power, created a self-reinforcing monopoly. Competitors who somehow overcame one barrier still faced the others. Starting a new diamond cutting operation required sourcing rough stones controlled by vertically integrated Israeli dealers, accessing markets dominated by Israeli distribution networks, competing on price, impossible against dealers with government subsidies and tax advantages, and building information networks, requiring decades of relationship development. The barriers were so effective that between 1995 and 2010, Not a single significant new competitor emerged to challenge Israeli dealers in rough diamond cutting. The industry became a closed system where Israeli families competed with each other but faced essentially no external competition. But monopolies attract attention, and by the mid-2000s, Israeli diamond dominance had created powerful enemies. De Beers, having lost control of the diamond trade to Israeli dealers, began developing strategies to reassert influence. African governments, recognizing how little value they captured from diamonds compared to Israeli middlemen, started demanding greater shares. Most threateningly, India's diamond industry, historically focused on small, low-quality stones, began moving upmarket, investing in cutting technology and supply relationships that threatened Israeli dealers' core business. The question facing Israeli diamond tycoons in 2005 wasn't whether their monopoly would face challenges. It was whether they could maintain control as the global diamond trade evolved. The next chapter would reveal just how ruthlessly Israeli dealers would fight to protect their empire. Chapter 7. Government Ties. The phone call came to Prime Minister Ariel Sharon's office at 11:47 p.m. on March 23, 2003. Benny Steinmetz, then one of Israel's wealthiest diamond dealers, was facing arrest in Guinea-Conakry on charges of bribing government officials to secure mining rights. Guinean authorities had raided Steinmetz's hotel room, seized documents, and were preparing criminal charges. If convicted, Steinmetz faced imprisonment in one of Africa's most dangerous jails and exposure of business practices that would damage the entire Israeli diamond industry. Within 6 hours, Israel's ambassador to Guinea received instructions directly from Sharon's office. Secure Steinmetz's release using whatever diplomatic pressure necessary. By 9 a.m., the ambassador met with Guinea's President Lansana Conté, delivering an unmistakable message. Arresting an Israeli citizen over business disputes would damage bilateral relations, potentially affecting Israeli military cooperation, technical assistance programs, and diplomatic support Guinea valued. Conté, recognizing the implicit threats, ordered Steinmetz's release by 2 p.m. that same day. This incident, reported by Israeli newspaper Haaretz in 2004 based on leaked diplomatic cables, exemplified the relationship between Israeli diamond dealers and the nation's political leadership. The connection wasn't merely commercial or incidental. Israeli diamond families had cultivated systematic political relationships over decades, creating a mutual dependency that gave them extraordinary government protection. The roots of this political integration dated to Israel's founding. Diamond dealers were among the young nation's wealthiest citizens in the 1950s and 1960s, when Israel desperately needed capital to build infrastructure, absorb immigrants, and fund military equipment. Diamond families provided crucial financial support, purchasing Israeli government bonds, making political contributions, and facilitating international business relationships that generated foreign currency. In return, Israeli politicians treated diamond dealers as strategic assets deserving special protection. Every Israeli prime minister from David Ben-Gurion through Benjamin Netanyahu maintained direct relationships with leading diamond families. These weren't distant formal connections. They were personal friendships involving regular communication, attendance at family events, and mutual assistance that blurred boundaries between public policy and private favor. Take the relationship between Lev Leviev and Benjamin Netanyahu. Leviev, an Uzbekistan-born Israeli diamond magnate, built a diamond empire in the 1990s through Russian and African operations. By 2000, Leviev ranked among Israel's 10 wealthiest individuals, with estimated net worth over $1 billion. Leviev and Netanyahu developed a close personal relationship starting in the mid-1990s, when Netanyahu served as opposition leader. Leviev provided political contributions, hosted fundraising events, and offered business advice. Netanyahu, in turn, facilitated Leviev's international business activities through diplomatic channels. When Netanyahu became prime minister in 2009, the relationship deepened. According to investigative reports by Israeli journalists, Netanyahu personally intervened with African leaders on Leviev's behalf at least 4 times between 2009 and 2012. In one particularly striking instance in 2011, Netanyahu called Angolan President José Eduardo dos Santos to urge favorable treatment of Leviev's mining operations. The call happened during a period when Angolan authorities were investigating Leviev's company for tax evasion and contract violations, charges that mysteriously disappeared after Netanyahu's intervention. The quid pro quo wasn't subtle. Leviev's foundations and associated organizations donated millions to causes important to Netanyahu, settlements in the West Bank, right-wing educational programs, and cultural institutions aligned with Netanyahu's political base. Leviev also provided favorable business deals to people in Netanyahu's circle, including real estate transactions that effectively transferred wealth to Netanyahu allies at below-market prices. This pattern repeated across Israeli politics. Diamond families cultivated relationships with politicians across the spectrum, Labour Party, Likud, religious parties, ensuring they had allies regardless of election outcomes. The strategy required substantial financial investment, but generated returns far exceeding the costs. Consider the tax benefits alone. Israeli diamond dealers enjoyed preferential tax treatment worth hundreds of millions of dollars annually. The government justified these benefits as export promotion. Diamonds generated foreign currency that benefited the entire economy. But the specific tax advantages exceeded what objective economic analysis would justify. Diamond dealers paid no value-added tax on transactions within Ramat Gan, faced minimal customs duties on rough imports, and benefited from special tax credits for export activities. These benefits resulted from lobbying by the Israel Diamond Manufacturers Association, which maintained a permanent presence in Jerusalem specifically to influence tax policy, trade regulations, and law enforcement priorities. The association's political influence was disproportionate to the industry's economic importance. Diamonds represented about 4% of Israeli GDP by 2010, yet the industry received government attention and benefits normally reserved for sectors 3 or 4 times larger. Why such political influence? Part of the answer involved the concentration of wealth among diamond families. By 2010, approximately 60 families controlled 90% of Israeli diamond trading. These families could coordinate political contributions and lobbying in ways fragmented industries couldn't match. When the Israel Diamond Manufacturers Association took a position on policy, it spoke with unified voice, backed by substantial financial resources. But wealth alone doesn't explain political influence. Plenty of wealthy industries face aggressive regulation. The diamond industry's unique advantage was its capacity to offer politicians something beyond money: international connections. Diamond families operated in dozens of countries, many without formal Israeli diplomatic relations. Politicians recognized that diamond dealers provided access to foreign leaders, intelligence about international situations, and informal channels for communication. Take the case of Israeli-African relations. Israel lost diplomatic ties with most African nations after the 1973 Yom Kippur War, when African countries broke relations in solidarity with Arab states. Through the 1980s and 1990s, Israel slowly rebuilt African relationships, often using diamond dealers as initial contacts. Diamond families operating in countries like Angola, Congo, and Sierra Leone had existing relationships with local leaders. Israeli diplomats leveraged these relationships to reopen diplomatic channels, eventually restoring formal ties with many African nations. Israeli politicians understood this dynamic and protected diamond dealers accordingly. When international investigators pursued Israeli dealers for conflict, diamond connections, or money laundering, Israeli authorities rarely cooperated. Diplomatic protection extended to helping dealers avoid extradition, blocking information sharing with foreign law enforcement, and using political pressure to influence foreign investigations. The most striking example involved the Sarifgate scandal of 2004. FBI investigators discovered that an Israeli diamond dealer, Yehuda Saraf, had laundered hundreds of millions through American banks on behalf of Russian organized crime. The evidence was overwhelming: wiretaps, bank records, testimony from cooperating witnesses. But when the FBI requested assistance from Israeli authorities to pursue charges against Saraf's Israeli operations, they encountered bureaucratic obstruction. Document requests went unanswered. Witnesses became unavailable. Israeli prosecutors claimed jurisdictional limitations prevented cooperation. Saraf ultimately served just 18 months in American prison and returned to Israel, where he continued operating diamond businesses without facing Israeli charges. The pattern was unmistakable. Israeli authorities prioritized protecting diamond dealers over international law enforcement cooperation. The calculation was brutally pragmatic. Diamond revenues and political connections mattered more than maintaining clean international legal relationships. This prioritization generated increasing international criticism through the 2000s. United Nations investigators, international NGOs, and foreign journalists repeatedly identified Israel as an obstacle to efforts addressing conflict diamonds, money laundering, and international financial crimes involving diamond trading. Israeli officials responded with diplomatic defensiveness, claiming critics were motivated by anti-Israeli bias rather than legitimate concerns. There was a kernel of truth in these defenses. Some criticism of Israeli diamond dealers did carry anti-Semitic undertones, conflating Jewish identity with business practices. But Israeli authorities weaponized anti-Semitism accusations to deflect all criticism, even when allegations were clearly grounded in documented evidence rather than prejudice. The strategy worked remarkably well. International investigators learned that pursuing Israeli diamond dealers meant facing accusations of anti-Semitism, making investigations politically costly. By 2010, the political protection diamond dealers enjoyed had become self-reinforcing. Politicians depended on diamond industry contributions and international connections. Diamond dealers depended on political protection from regulation and international scrutiny. Neither side could easily break the relationship without suffering significant costs. But this mutual dependency created a vulnerability that would become apparent in the next decade. As international pressure on conflict diamonds intensified, as money laundering regulations tightened globally, and as technology began disrupting traditional diamond trading, the Israeli diamond industry's reliance on political protection rather than operational efficiency would prove problematic. The industry was about to face challenges that political connections alone couldn't solve. Chapter 8. Money Laundering. Ramat Gan's diamond exchange operates on a principle that sounds innocuous, but enables systematic money laundering. Diamonds are traded primarily through cash transactions with minimal documentation requirements. Walk into the exchange as a registered dealer, and you can purchase diamonds worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, using cash with essentially no questions about the money's source. This isn't a bug in the system. It's a feature that has attracted billions in illicit funds over decades. The mechanics are straightforward. A criminal organization generates cash from illegal activities, drug trafficking, corruption, tax evasion, arms sales, and needs to convert that cash into legitimate assets. The organization contacts a diamond dealer. Many specialize in these services, though they'd never advertise them. The dealer accepts cash to purchase diamonds, providing documentation showing the diamonds as legitimate inventory purchased from suppliers. The criminal organization then sells the diamonds through different channels, receiving payment through legitimate banking systems. The money is now clean, transformed from illicit cash into documented proceeds from diamond sales. Israeli diamond dealers perfected this laundering technique because Ramat Gan's regulatory environment made it nearly risk-free. Israel's financial reporting requirements exempted diamond transactions from rules that applied to other industries. While banks had to report cash transactions over $10,000, diamond dealers faced no such requirements. While real estate agents had to verify clients' identities and fund sources, diamond dealers could trade based on minimal identification. The Israeli government justified these exemptions by claiming diamonds required special treatment. Their high value and small size made standard financial regulations impractical. But the real reason was protecting diamond dealers' competitive advantages. Strict anti-money laundering rules would have driven business to less regulated jurisdictions, costing Israeli dealers market share and Israel tax revenue. Let me give you specific examples that demonstrate the scale. In 2007, FBI and Israeli police conducted a rare joint investigation of Israeli diamond dealer Shalom Weiss. Wiretaps revealed Weiss had laundered approximately $400 million for Russian organized crime figures over 5 years. The scheme was almost absurdly simple. Russian criminals shipped cash to Israel in diplomatic pouches, avoiding customs inspection, delivered the cash to Weiss in Tel Aviv, and received diamonds that could be sold internationally. Weiss charged a fee of 7 to 9%, generating personal profits of roughly $30 million. The investigation resulted in Weiss's arrest in New York in 2008, where he eventually pleaded guilty to money laundering charges. But Israeli authorities declined to prosecute Weiss's Israeli operations or seize his assets in Israel, claiming procedural issues prevented charges. Weiss served 3 years in American prison, returned to Israel, and resumed diamond trading within 6 months of his release. This outcome was typical. Israeli authorities rarely prosecuted money laundering cases involving diamond dealers, even when foreign law enforcement provided overwhelming evidence. Between 2000 and 2015, Israeli prosecutors filed money laundering charges against diamond dealers in just 11 cases, despite international investigators identifying hundreds of suspicious Israeli diamond transactions during that same period. The industry's resistance to anti-money laundering regulation was both systematic and politically sophisticated. The Israel Diamond Manufacturers Association lobbied intensively against regulatory changes, arguing that additional requirements would damage Israel's competitive position. The association funded academic studies purporting to show that money laundering through diamonds was exaggerated, that existing regulations were sufficient, and that stricter rules would cost jobs and export revenue. Israeli politicians, dependent on diamond industry contributions, echoed these arguments. When international organizations like the Financial Action Task Force, FATF, criticized Israel's inadequate diamond sector regulation in 2004, Israeli officials responded with technical objections rather than substantive reform. Israel promised improved oversight, but implemented minimal actual changes. The most revealing example of Israeli authorities' approach involved the Leviev Gertler investigation of 2012. Dan Gertler, an Israeli diamond dealer operating primarily in Democratic Republic of Congo, was accused by United Nations investigators of paying bribes worth over $100 million to Congolese officials to secure mining concessions. The investigation documented specific transactions, named companies involved, and provided bank records showing suspicious payments. Rather than investigating Gertler, Israeli authorities criticized the UN report as biased. Israeli government officials defended Gertler, characterizing him as a legitimate businessman unfairly targeted for political reasons. When the US Treasury Department sanctioned Gertler in 2017 for corruption, freezing his American assets, and barring American citizens from doing business with him, Israeli authorities still declined to pursue charges. Gertler continued operating businesses in Israel without restriction. This protective stance toward accused money launderers wasn't irrational. It reflected Israeli policymakers' calculation that diamond industry revenues justified tolerating questionable practices. The math was straightforward. Stricter anti-money laundering enforcement might make Israel less attractive to criminals, but it would also make the country less attractive to legitimate dealers who valued regulatory flexibility. Lost revenue from all sources could reach hundreds of millions annually, affecting employment and tax receipts. Israeli authorities essentially made a Faustian bargain: accept that some criminal money would flow through Israeli diamond channels in exchange for maintaining the industry's overall profitability. The government could claim it opposed money laundering while doing little to actually prevent it. But international pressure was increasing. After 9/11, counter-terrorism financing became a global priority, and diamond trading faced new scrutiny as a potential channel for terrorist funding. The 2015 Paris attacks, partly financed through informal diamond trading networks, generated renewed demands for regulation. The United States and European Union began threatening sanctions against countries with inadequate financial oversight, and Israel's diamond sector was specifically identified as a regulatory black hole. By 2016, Israel faced a credible threat of international isolation unless it reformed diamond sector oversight. The FATF placed Israel on a watch list, warning that failure to implement anti-money laundering reforms could result in designation as a non-cooperative jurisdiction, essentially financial blacklisting that would severely damage Israeli banks' international operations. This threat finally forced action. In 2017, Israel implemented new regulations requiring diamond dealers to report suspicious transactions, verify customer identities, and maintain records of large cash transactions. The regulations applied to transactions over $50,000, still far higher than thresholds in most industries, but at least acknowledging the need for oversight. Israeli diamond dealers fought the regulations bitterly. The Israel Diamond Manufacturers Association filed lawsuits challenging the rules' constitutionality, argued they would destroy Israel's competitive position, and lobbied for exemptions that would gut the regulations' effectiveness. But international pressure was too intense. Israeli officials, facing potential sanctions that would damage the broader economy, refused to cave to diamond industry demands. The implementation has been mixed. Israeli authorities claim improved compliance and increased reporting of suspicious transactions. International investigators remain skeptical, noting that Israel still prosecutes far fewer money laundering cases than the volume of suspicious activity would suggest. The gap between stated policy and actual enforcement suggests Israel is performing compliance theater, doing just enough to avoid international sanctions while preserving diamond dealers' operational flexibility. The money laundering issue reveals a fundamental tension in Israel's relationship with its diamond industry. On one hand, Israeli policymakers recognize that criminal connections and lax oversight damage the country's international reputation. On the other hand, those same attributes make Israeli diamond trading extraordinarily profitable, generating revenues and employment that politicians value. Resolving this tension would require Israeli authorities to prioritize long-term reputation over short-term revenues, a calculation Israeli politicians have consistently declined to make. The result is an industry that occupies a permanent gray zone between legitimate business and criminal facilitation, protected by a government that values its economic contributions more than its ethical liabilities. But money laundering wasn't the only challenge facing Israeli diamond dealers by 2015. A potentially more existential threat was emerging, technology that threatened to disrupt the traditional diamond trade entirely. Chapter 9: Tech Disruption. In March 2016, a small California startup called Diamond Foundry announced a breakthrough. It had developed technology to grow gem-quality diamonds in laboratory settings at production costs approximately 40% below mined diamond prices. The diamonds were chemically and physically identical to natural stones. Only specialized equipment could distinguish them. Consumers could purchase diamonds with identical visual characteristics at a fraction of traditional costs, while avoiding ethical concerns about mining conditions and conflict diamonds. The announcement generated immediate buzz in tech and environmental circles. Leonardo DiCaprio invested in Diamond Foundry, citing conflict diamond concerns. Environmental groups celebrated the technology as eliminating mining's ecological damage. Tech publications called it a disruptive innovation that would democratize diamond ownership. Israeli diamond dealers' reaction was panic, thinly disguised as dismissal. The Israel Diamond Manufacturers Association released statements claiming synthetic diamonds were inferior products that consumers wouldn't accept. Industry executives argued that diamonds' value stemmed from natural scarcity. Laboratory stones lacked the romance and authenticity that made diamonds special. Leading dealers predicted synthetic diamonds would remain a niche market, never threatening natural stones. This response revealed how fundamentally threatened Israeli dealers felt. Laboratory-grown diamonds attacked every advantage Israeli dealers had built over 70 years. The advantages depended on controlling natural diamond supply chains, relationships with African mines, cutting expertise for natural stones, trading networks built on scarcity. Laboratory diamonds bypassed all of this infrastructure. A technology company in California could produce stones without African mines, without complex supply chains, without Israeli dealers' intermediation. The threat wasn't just theoretical. By 2018, laboratory diamond production was growing at 50% annually. Retailers like JCPenney and Signet Jewelers began offering lab-grown options alongside natural diamonds. Consumer surveys showed millennials and Gen Z buyers, the crucial future market, were actually more interested in laboratory stones, valuing ethical sourcing and environmental sustainability over traditional romance narratives. Prices reflected the competitive pressure. In 2016, laboratory diamonds sold at approximately 60% of natural diamond prices. By 2020, the gap had widened. Laboratory stones sold at 30 to 40% of natural prices for equivalent quality. Natural diamond prices, meanwhile, stagnated or declined in most categories as supply exceeded demand. Israeli dealers tried multiple strategies to counter the laboratory threat. The first approach was definitional, insisting that laboratory stones shouldn't be called diamonds at all. The industry lobbied the Federal Trade Commission to require terms like synthetic or man-made whenever laboratory diamonds were marketed. The goal was creating stigma through language, making laboratory stones sound fake or inferior. This strategy partially succeeded. The FTC required clear disclosure when diamonds were laboratory grown, but the regulatory victory didn't change consumer behavior as Israeli dealers hoped. Many consumers actually preferred laboratory diamonds once they understood the distinction. The word synthetic didn't carry the negative connotations dealers expected. Instead, it signaled modernity and scientific advancement that appealed to tech-savvy buyers. The second strategy was emphasizing natural diamonds' investment value. Israeli dealers promoted diamonds as stores of wealth, comparable to gold, assets that would appreciate over time. Laboratory diamonds, being abundantly producible, couldn't serve this function. Only natural diamonds' scarcity made them investment grade. This argument was fundamentally dishonest. Diamonds had never been good investments for consumers. Retail markups on diamond jewelry typically reached 300 to 400%. Consumers who purchased diamonds at retail prices and tried reselling them received perhaps 25 to 30% of what they paid. Unlike gold, which trades in liquid markets with transparent pricing, diamonds lack standardized values. A diamond's resale price depends on finding a buyer willing to accept a seller's assessment of quality, a difficult proposition without institutional pricing mechanisms. But the investment narrative had psychological appeal, and Israeli dealers pushed it aggressively through marketing campaigns and public relations efforts. De Beers, which had partially reconciled with Israeli dealers by this point, joined the campaign with its "Real is rare, real is a diamond" slogan, positioning natural stones as authentic while implying laboratory alternatives were somehow fake. The third strategy was vertical integration into retail. Israeli diamond families began acquiring retail jewelry chains, giving them direct control over consumer access. By 2019, Israeli-affiliated ownership stakes existed in dozens of major jewelry retailers across North America and Europe. This ownership allowed Israeli dealers to control what inventory retailers offered, naturally favoring natural diamonds over laboratory alternatives. But even retail control couldn't fully stem the laboratory tide. Online retailers like Brilliant Earth and James Allen offered laboratory diamonds through e-commerce platforms, bypassing traditional retail channels. These companies targeted younger consumers comfortable with online jewelry purchases and attracted to laboratory diamonds' lower prices and ethical positioning. By 2020, online laboratory diamond sales exceeded $1 billion annually, small relative to the overall diamond market but growing rapidly. The fourth strategy was technological counter-innovation. If laboratory technology threatened natural diamonds, perhaps Israeli dealers could develop technology that enhanced natural stones' value or created new product categories. Some Israeli companies invested in diamond enhancement techniques, treatments that improved color or clarity of lower-quality natural stones. Others experimented with blockchain tracking systems that documented natural diamonds' provenance, addressing ethical concerns without abandoning natural supply chains. These efforts generated marginal innovations, but nothing that fundamentally changed the competitive dynamic. Enhanced natural diamonds remained more expensive than laboratory alternatives. Blockchain provenance couldn't overcome price differentials, consumers interested primarily in aesthetics, and price would still choose laboratory stones. By 2020, Israeli diamond dealers faced an uncomfortable reality. Laboratory diamonds weren't a temporary fad or niche product. They were a legitimate competitive threat that would permanently claim market share. The question was, how much share? Would laboratory diamonds remain a minority option for price-conscious buyers, or would they eventually dominate the market, relegating natural diamonds to a luxury niche? The answer depended partly on factors outside Israeli dealers' control: consumer preferences, technological improvements, marketing effectiveness. But it also depended on whether Israeli dealers could adapt their business models to the new reality. Some Israeli diamond families began diversifying, investing in laboratory diamond production themselves, recognizing that fighting the technology was futile. This adaptation was controversial within the Israeli diamond community. Traditionalists viewed laboratory diamond involvement as betrayal, undermining natural diamonds' value and abandoning 70 years of infrastructure development. Pragmatists argued survival required flexibility, better to participate in laboratory diamonds' growth than be destroyed by it. The generational divide was stark. Older dealers who had built fortunes controlling natural supply chains couldn't imagine abandoning that model. Younger family members, recognizing that technology had permanently changed the landscape, pushed for diversification. Many Israeli diamond families experienced internal conflicts as different generations fought over strategic direction. The technological threat also exposed vulnerabilities in Israeli dealers' government relationships. While political connections protected dealers from law enforcement scrutiny, they couldn't protect against market disruption. No amount of lobbying could make consumers prefer more expensive natural stones over cheaper laboratory alternatives if the products were functionally identical. Israeli dealers learned a painful lesson that other disrupted industries had learned before. Government protection and regulatory advantages matter far less than fundamental economics. When a new technology offers superior value propositions, incumbent advantages erode regardless of political influence. By 2022, laboratory diamonds represented approximately 8 to 10% of global diamond jewelry market share, small but growing. Industry forecasts projected laboratory stones could reach 20 to 25% market share by 2030. Israeli dealers who dismissed laboratory diamonds as irrelevant in 2016 were scrambling to develop strategies by 2022. But technology wasn't the only force reshaping the diamond trade. The family structure that had given Israeli dealers competitive advantages for decades was beginning to fracture. Generational transitions were creating succession crises. Wealth accumulated over 70 years was being divided among growing numbers of heirs. The tight-knit family networks that enabled Israeli dominance were loosening. Understanding these family dynamics requires examining the dynasties themselves, how they were built, how they function, and why they're beginning to unravel. Chapter 10. Family Dynasties. The Steinmetz Diamond Dynasty operates from an unassuming office building in Ramat Gan's Diamond Exchange District. No exterior signage identifies the location. Security requires biometric authentication. Inside, approximately 40 family members and trusted employees manage diamond operations spanning 23 countries, controlling assets estimated at $3 billion. The family hasn't granted media interviews in over 30 years. Their business practices, decision-making processes, and internal dynamics remain opaque, precisely as they intend. This secrecy typifies Israeli diamond dynasties. Unlike tech billionaires who cultivate public profiles or real estate magnates who brand buildings with their names, diamond families operate in shadows. The obscurity isn't accidental, it's strategic. Public visibility attracts scrutiny, regulatory attention, and competitive intelligence. Invisibility provides operational freedom. Understanding how these dynasties function requires examining their structure. Israeli diamond families typically organize around a patriarch, occasionally matriarch, who controls key decisions and maintains family discipline. Children and grandchildren occupy positions throughout the business, according to their abilities and the family's strategic needs. Marriages are often strategically arranged within the diamond community, cementing alliances between families and consolidating wealth. Take the Leviev family as an example. Lev Leviev, born in Uzbekistan in 1956, immigrated to Israel at age 15 and entered the diamond trade through apprenticeship with an Antwerp dealer. By the 1980s, Leviev had established his own trading operation, sourcing rough stones from Soviet sources through connections in Uzbekistan. The fall of the Soviet Union in 1991 created opportunities as Russian diamond resources became accessible to private dealers. Leviev leveraged connections from his Uzbekistan background to secure Russian supply, building a business that generated over $500 million annually by 2000. Leviev had 9 children, 5 sons and 4 daughters. Rather than dividing the business equally, Leviev assigned specific roles based on each child's capabilities. His eldest son, Nisan, managed African mining operations. A second son, Ran, oversaw cutting factories in Israel. A third son, Dan, handled international sales. Daughters married into other diamond families, creating alliance networks. This structured role assignment prevented the internal competition that often destroys family businesses. The system worked because Leviev maintained absolute authority. Major decisions, which mining concessions to pursue, how to price inventory, whether to partner with other dealers, required Leviev's approval. Children could manage their assigned domains, but couldn't deviate from family strategy. This centralized control ensured coordination and prevented the fragmentation that weakens many multi-generational businesses. But centralized control creates succession problems. Lev Leviev was 78 years old in 2024, still actively managing business operations, but inevitably approaching retirement or death. When that transition happens, will his children maintain unified control? Or will they split the business, pursuing individual interests? The answer will determine whether the Leviev dynasty remains a dominant force or dissolves into smaller operations. This succession question affects virtually every major Israeli diamond family. The first generation, dealers who built empires between 1950 and 1980, are now in their 70s and 80s. They accumulated wealth through exceptional timing, ruthless competition, and personal relationships that can't be replicated. Their children, born into wealth, often lack the hunger and skills that built the businesses. The third generation, grandchildren now entering the business, are even further removed from the founding dynamics. Generational decline is a universal pattern in family businesses, but Israeli diamond dynasties face particular vulnerabilities. The tight-knit networks that gave Israeli dealers competitive advantages depended on personal relationships and trust mechanisms developed over decades. A patriarch who grew up in post-war Antwerp, immigrated to Israel, built African supply chains, and cultivated political connections embodied institutional knowledge and relationship capital that can't simply transfer to children who grew up in Ramat Gan mansions. Consider the specific knowledge required. A successful Israeli diamond dealer needs to assess rough stone quality instantly, a skill developed through handling hundreds of thousands of stones over decades. They need to know which African officials to approach for mining concessions, which politicians to support for favorable regulation, which competitors to trust, and which to suspect. They need to understand market dynamics, pricing patterns, and technological changes. This knowledge accumulates slowly and requires constant updating through active involvement. The first generation acquired this knowledge through necessity. They had no alternative but to learn every aspect of the business to survive. Subsequent generations often receive wealth without developing equivalent expertise. They attend prestigious universities, study business administration or finance, and return to the family business as executives rather than craftsmen. They understand financial statements, but not diamond cutting. They know merger strategy, but not African politics. They can manage established operations but struggle to identify new opportunities or navigate crises. This expertise gap creates vulnerability when founders die or retire. Businesses that thrived under first-generation leadership often stagnate or collapse under second-generation management. The statistics are striking. Approximately 70% of family businesses don't survive the transition from first to second generation. Only about 12% survive to the third generation. Israeli diamond dynasties face additional pressures from wealth division. Israeli inheritance law, influenced by Jewish religious principles, typically divides estates among all children. A patriarch with 5 children who built a $3 billion business leaves each child approximately $600 million. That's still substantial wealth, but it's fragmented. If those 5 children have their own children, let's say 4 each, the third generation would have 20 heirs splitting the original wealth, approximately $150 million each. Over 3 generations, a unified billion-dollar operation can fragment into dozens of separate entities, each too small to maintain the scale advantages that made the original business dominant. This fragmentation is already visible in Israeli diamond trade. Families that operated as unified forces in the 1980s now have internal divisions, with cousins competing against each other, siblings pursuing different strategies, and younger generations questioning whether continuing in diamonds makes sense compared to other investment opportunities. The questioning reflects broader economic shifts. The first generation had limited alternatives. Diamonds were the accessible path to wealth for Jewish immigrants with European cutting expertise. Subsequent generations, born into wealth, have options. They can invest in technology, real estate, finance, or other industries with potentially higher returns and lower ethical complications than diamonds. Why stay in an industry facing technological disruption, reputational damage, and declining margins? Some Israeli diamond family members are choosing different paths. A 2019 survey by the Israel Diamond Manufacturers Association found that only 42% of diamond dealers' children plan to enter the family business, down from 78% in 1995. The declining interest reflects both pull factors, better alternatives, and push factors, recognition that diamond dealing's golden era has passed. The family members who remain in diamonds face pressures that prior generations didn't experience. Social media and investigative journalism make secrecy harder to maintain. Younger consumers care about ethical sourcing in ways that older generations didn't. Regulatory compliance requirements force transparency that diamond families traditionally avoided. The comfortable opacity that enabled questionable practices is eroding. These pressures create generational conflicts. Older family members, accustomed to operating with minimal oversight, resist changes they view as threats to competitive advantages. Younger members, more attuned to reputational risks and modern business practices, push for reforms. These conflicts often remain private. Diamond families don't air internal disputes publicly, but they create dysfunction that weakens businesses. The Gertler family's troubles illustrate these dynamics. Dan Gertler, a third-generation diamond dealer, built operations in Democratic Republic of Congo through relationships with President Joseph Kabila. Gertler's deals generated billions in revenue, but involved systematic bribery and exploitation of Congolese resources. When the U.S. Treasury sanctioned Gertler in 2017, it created crisis for the family business. Gertler's relatives, recognizing the sanctions' reputational damage, pressured him to settle with American authorities and distance the family from his operations. Gertler refused, believing the sanctions were unjust political attacks. The family split, some members continuing association with Gertler, others severing connections to protect their own business interests. This type of internal fracture would have been unthinkable in prior generations, when family unity trumped individual interests. But modern pressures make unity harder to maintain when family members face different risk-return calculations. By 2024, Israeli diamond dynasties were at an inflection point. The family structures that enabled Israeli dominance were showing age. Founders were dying or retiring without clear succession plans. Wealth was fragmenting across generations. Younger members questioned whether diamonds remained the best investment of their time and capital. External pressures, technology, regulation, ethical concerns made traditional business models less viable. The question wasn't whether Israeli diamond families would remain wealthy. Most had diversified investments, ensuring ongoing prosperity. The question was whether they would remain unified forces in the diamond trade or dissolve into fragmented operations, ceding market share to competitors who could offer modern consumers what they increasingly demanded: transparency, ethical sourcing, and business practices compatible with 21st century values. That question's answer would determine not just individual families' futures, but the future of Israeli diamond dominance itself. Chapter 11. Modern Reckoning. On December 2, 2021, the European Union published a blacklist of 13 countries with inadequate anti-money laundering controls. Israel appeared on the list, a humiliating designation for a developed nation that considers itself part of the Western democratic community. The EU's rationale was blunt. Israeli diamond sector oversight remained insufficient despite years of promises to reform. The blacklisting would restrict European banks' transactions with Israeli financial institutions, potentially costing Israel billions in economic activity. The designation represented a watershed moment. For 70 years, Israeli diamond dealers had operated with minimal oversight, protected by political connections and regulatory arbitrage. That arrangement was collapsing under international pressure that Israel's government could no longer deflect. The EU blacklisting forced a choice: implement genuine reforms that would limit diamond dealers' operational flexibility, or accept increasing international isolation. Israeli policymakers chose reform, sort of. In March 2022, Israel enacted sweeping new regulations for the diamond sector. Dealers would face mandatory reporting requirements for transactions over $20,000. Customer identity verification became mandatory. Suspicious transaction reports would go directly to Israel's Financial Intelligence Unit, bypassing the industry association's filtering. Cash transaction limits were implemented. Foreign currency movements required documentation. On paper, the reforms looked substantial. In practice, implementation remained weak. The Israel Diamond Manufacturers Association negotiated exemptions that gutted enforcement. Dealers received grace periods to phase in compliance. Reporting thresholds remained far higher than in other industries. Israeli authorities assigned just 11 inspectors to oversee 2,500 dealers, a ratio ensuring minimal enforcement. International observers remained skeptical. The Financial Action Task Force, which monitors global anti-money laundering efforts, noted in its 2023 Israel assessment that significant gaps remain in diamond sector oversight, despite legislative reforms. The EU kept Israel on its watch list, threatening renewed blacklisting if implementation didn't improve. This regulatory pressure reflects broader forces reshaping the global diamond trade. The combination of ethical concerns about conflict diamonds, environmental awareness about mining's impacts, and technological alternatives through laboratory stones has created a perfect storm challenging traditional diamond dealing. Israeli dealers, having built their empire on secrecy and regulatory arbitrage, were particularly vulnerable to these shifts. Consumer attitudes illustrate the challenge. A 2022 survey by Bain & Company found that 73% of American consumers under age 45 cared about diamond sourcing ethics when making purchase decisions, up from 42% in 2015. 68% said they were willing to pay premiums for verified ethical sourcing. Conversely, only 31% believed current certification systems, including the Kimberly process, adequately ensured ethical sourcing. These attitudes create market pressure for transparency that Israeli diamond dealers historically resisted. The dealers' business model depended on information asymmetry. They knew supply chains, consumers didn't. Blockchain tracking, ethical certification, and supply chain transparency efforts threaten to eliminate that asymmetry, commoditizing diamonds and reducing dealers' ability to extract monopoly rents. Some Israeli dealers are adapting. Companies like Serene Technologies, an Israeli firm, developed artificial intelligence systems that track individual diamonds through supply chains, creating permanent digital records documenting each stone's journey from mine to retail. This technology enables the transparency consumers demand, while potentially giving Israeli companies advantages in the emerging tracked diamond market. But most Israeli diamond dealers view transparency as threat rather than opportunity. The Israel Diamond Manufacturers Association has opposed blockchain tracking mandates, argued against stricter sourcing certification, and lobbied to delay implementation of traceability requirements. The resistance reflects recognition that transparency would expose practices that depend on opacity, tax optimization structures, connections to questionable mining operations, premium pricing justified by information asymmetry. The Laboratory Diamond Challenge compounds these pressures. By 2024, laboratory-grown diamonds represented approximately 14% of global diamond jewelry market share, up from just 3% in 2018. Growth was concentrated among younger buyers, suggesting the trend would accelerate as millennials and Gen Z became dominant consumer demographics. Prices for laboratory stones continued falling. By 2024, equivalent quality laboratory diamonds sold at just 25 to 35% of natural diamond prices. Israeli dealers' response has been chaotic and divided. Some families have invested in laboratory diamond production, essentially hedging against natural diamonds' decline. Others have doubled down on natural stones, arguing that true luxury consumers would always prefer natural diamonds' authenticity. Still others are exiting the diamond business entirely, diversifying into technology, real estate, or financial services. This strategic fragmentation reflects the family dynasty dynamics discussed earlier. Without unified first-generation leadership, Israeli diamond families lack coordination that enabled collective action in prior decades. Each family makes independent decisions about laboratory diamonds, transparency, and strategic direction. The result is a fractured industry that can't mount coherent responses to external challenges. The political protection that sustained Israeli diamond dealers for decades is also weakening. Younger Israeli politicians, less personally connected to diamond families and more conscious of international reputations, show less willingness to shield the industry from scrutiny. The Netanyahu government, that provided strong diamond industry support, has faced corruption investigations partly involving favors granted to diamond dealers. Public opinion in Israel increasingly questions whether diamond dealers deserve special treatment, given their limited contribution to modern Israeli economy. The industry now represents less than 2% of Israeli GDP, down from 15% in the 1960s. A 2023 investigation by Israeli newspaper Haaretz revealed the extent of political influence diamond families had wielded. Using leaked documents and whistleblower testimony, the investigation showed diamond dealers had provided over $40 million in political contributions and benefits to Israeli politicians between 2005 and 2020. The contributions bought regulatory forbearance, diplomatic support, and favorable tax treatment. Public reaction was overwhelmingly negative. Polls showed 74% of Israelis believed diamond dealers had received unfair advantages through political corruption. This revelation damaged the implicit social contract that had sustained the industry. Israelis had tolerated diamond dealers' special treatment when the industry generated substantial economic benefits and national prestige. As those benefits declined and ethical concerns increased, public support evaporated. Politicians recognized that protecting diamond dealers had become political liability rather than asset. The African dimension adds further complication. Post-colonial reckoning has led African nations to question historical arrangements with Israeli diamond dealers. Countries like Democratic Republic of Congo and Angola have begun renegotiating diamond agreements, demanding greater shares of value and threatening to exclude Israeli dealers who won't accept new terms. African governments recognize their negotiating position has strengthened, with laboratory diamonds reducing natural stones' scarcity value. Mine-producing countries have leverage they historically lacked. In 2023, Angola cancelled several long-standing diamond concessions held by Israeli companies, including operations that had functioned for over 30 years. The Angolan government cited contract violations and environmental damage, but the real motivation was clear: capturing more value by dealing directly with cutters in India and China rather than routing diamonds through Israeli middlemen. Other African nations watched Angola's success and considered similar actions. Israeli dealers face an uncomfortable reality. The advantages that built their empire are eroding simultaneously. Supply access is threatened by African renegotiations. Distribution dominance is challenged by laboratory alternatives. Regulatory arbitrage is closing under international pressure. Political protection is weakening as public support fades. Family unity is fragmenting across generations. Technology is disrupting traditional business models. Any one of these challenges would require significant adaptation. All of them together represent an existential crisis. Israeli diamond dealers dominated the global trade for 70 years by exploiting specific historical conditions: post-war supply chain disruptions, African nations' weak negotiating positions, consumer ignorance about sourcing, regulatory fragmentation, and technology limitations. Those conditions no longer exist. The question now is whether Israeli diamond dealers can transition from a system built on opacity, political connections, and information